Can you hear me? Is that good? All right. All right, perfect. It's good to see everybody here tonight. We are, of course, continuing our study here in the Green Book. Ooh, Wesley, can you turn me down just half a notch there? That'd be great. I'd appreciate it. If it was loud to me, I know it's loud to y'all who are in more direct line of the speakers. But we're going to continue here in our Green Book that we've been using, One Another Christianity. Talking tonight about do not speak against one another. This is lesson 9, and it starts on page 35 in the book if you've got it with you. I'll have a lot of the stuff we'll be talking about on the screen, but it goes along pretty well with the notes here in the book. So if you want to follow along in your book, write things out, answer on there, you're welcome to do it. We'll cover quite a bit, maybe not all of it, but quite a bit of what is in lesson 9 there this evening if time allows. So, excuse me. So do not speak against one another. So interesting topic. You know, I've been joking with people saying, you know, when I was looking through and deciding which one to choose, I chose that one because I wanted to teach a lesson that said you can't speak bad against the preacher, right? But now I don't know that's exactly what the lesson is really about. But no, really, I saw that topic and I was like, you know, I don't know when the last time I heard a lesson specifically on that topic is. So, and I thought we kind of lump it into some other categories from time to time. So, anyway, we're going to talk about it tonight. So let's start in James chapter 4 and then chapter 5. Because these are really the two passages that really the topic or the title of the lesson comes from what is written in these two verses. So let's start by reading one of those. So whoever gets there first, if you'll take chapter 4, verse 11, and then whoever after that can take chapter 5, verse 9.
Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge of it.
Okay. And then chapter 5, verse 9. All right, so grudge not against one another, or other translations, grumble, do not grumble or do not murmur against one another, depending on your translation there. So those two verses there in James are kind of where the title for this lesson comes from, about not speaking poorly against one another. So let's start back in chapter 4, verse 11, when it says, do not speak evil against one another. That's obviously the title of the lesson. So let's just ask the general question, what does it mean to speak evil against a brother? Speak cruelly against them, yeah. Okay, slander's a big one, right? Now we could go down the list. We'll do that in a minute. The list that's on your page there in the book, you know, gives some examples of maybe this type of speech. If you think about what Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29 says, right? Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear, right? So I would say speaking evil against a brother would be any type of language about a brother that does not line up with that, specifically does not build up another person or is not in their best interest. So if I'm talking about someone in a way that doesn't build them up or does not serve their best interest, that's probably speaking evil against them, right? And so we'll talk about the different categories of speech that maybe fall into this category, but maybe another way that we could, you know, say this concept is don't sin against your brother with your tongue. Right? There are a lot of sins of the tongue that we can commit. We'll talk about them tonight. Don't commit those against your brothers. Kind of the general idea of not speaking evil about them. So, and we'll talk about the importance of some of that as we go along the way. So let's go ahead and get some definitions here, right? On your book there, it asks to define these different words, and these are different types of speech, sins of the tongue, so forth, that we can go through. Some of them are more self-explanatory. Some of them we might talk about a little bit more. But the first one, it kind of goes along with what is written in James chapter 5 and verse 9, and that is murmuring. Somebody give us your definition of what it means to murmur. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right, Lyndall. That's how I would describe it too. I think that's the gist of what is written in James chapter 5, verse 9, grumbling against one another there. So I try to think of some examples of this. I mean, we could give everyday examples from our life, right? Like, here's an example that I thought of. Everybody, well, I say everybody, a lot of times if you've been in the church for a long time, you know that the elders sometimes make decisions in churches that not everybody agrees with. Not to burst y'all's bubble, I think y'all have made great decisions. Hey, listen, I got to keep a job, okay? Yeah, I got to keep a job, No. But not, sometimes elders, when you're in any leadership position, you're going to make a decision that not everybody agrees with, right? And sometimes what happens is people in the church or any other situation know, okay, the decision they made, it wasn't sinful or wrong, so we need to follow their leadership, but they still grumble and complain about it under their breath into other people, right? Be like, I don't like that decision they made. It wasn't the right one, I don't think, but it wasn't anything wrong with it, so we got to go along with it because they're the elders, right? And so there's a sense in which it's almost like pseudo-submission, right? I'm going to go along with the eldership here, but really it's not total because you got the grumbling, complaining aspect of it there too. One that I thought of in Scripture was Israelites in the wilderness, right? And they are famous for grumbling and complaining against God. Let's look at that for a second. Go to Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16, and let's start in verse number 2. And then if somebody wants to read it for us, we'll look at verses 2 through 8. Exodus 16, 2 through 8. Okay, so they have a famous example there of the Israelites grumbling or murmuring, complaining about their situation in the wilderness. Of course, they thought at first they're grumbling and complaining against Moses, right? Moses and Aaron. But they get a correction there from Moses and says, actually, you're grumbling against the Lord because we're just following the Lord's instructions. But that's one of the ways that we can speak evil against one another is this idea of, complaining or murmuring, under your breath or to somebody else, without the other person hearing about what this person did or what they said or how they act, anything along those lines. Yes?
Well, we see there how the Lord, He knew that, and yet He gave them what they needed.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul talks about that. Don't be like those who, were all under the cloud, passed through the sea, baptized in Moses,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then in verse 10, or grumbled as some of them did, and destroyed.
Mm.
They got the just due.
Yeah. Yep, that's right. All right, let's look at the next one. Okay, a little more self-explanatory, right? I don't know that we need to give an in-depth definition of lying. Okay, we know what it is to lie. I just jotted down intentionally saying something dishonest, false, or deceitful. I give some emphasis on the term intentional, right? Lying implies it's done on purpose, right? You can accidentally tell an untruth. You don't know. You thought you were telling truth. You didn't. You ended up not. That's not really a lie. It's just speaking in ignorance. But Lying is intentional deceit, intentional deception, or falsehood. Slander. Mickey mentioned slander earlier. What's a definition of slandering somebody? Yeah. You're going to say, speaking of lying, tell a lie, speak a falsehood about someone. Typically, it's to attack their name or their reputation, right? Make them look worse. Political slandering happens all the time, for instance, right? It's unfortunate. I hate election years because of that. And you're trying to watch, sporting event on TV, and it's just like ad after ad in the football game about like one of the presidential candidates or a senator candidate or something, and it's just like trying to slander their name. Who knows? Some of it may be true, some of it maybe not. I don't know on that stuff, but that's the idea of slandering. Now, keeping all of these are problems in general, right? Murmuring is a problem in general, slandering, lying. This is in the context of how you speak about and considering people in the brotherhood, in the church. Do not speak. Remember, this is about one another Christianity, right? So do not speak evil against one another. What a shame that would be to see something like that in the church, where people are slandering the reputation of somebody else. And yet I've seen it. I've seen preachers be slandered in the church really for no reason. I've seen that happen to elderships. I've seen it happen to congregations in some instances, even where congregations' names get slandered when they really didn't do anything that was worthy of it. So got to be careful about that. Here's the next one is gossip. What is the definition of gossiping? Yeah. It's kind of similar to slander, but slander typically lies in the realm of it being false, right? But gossip is a little more subtle, and the truth is, even though we don't like to admit it, gossip can be true or false, right? Just because something is true doesn't mean, it's not gossip, right? It's like, it might have been true, but it can still be gossip. Yep. Yep. That was a big thing early on in the first couple of centuries. Yeah, that's a good definition. I like that, Lyndall. Now these are these are not like straight definitions I pulled from anywhere. These are, kind of pulling stuff together and then me putting it together. I said, speaking about or spreading rumors about someone behind their back without their consent and in a negative connotation. I think that's a big one. Gossip is, it's typically in some type of negative, even if it's not to the point of slander where I'm hoping to like totally destroy somebody's name. It's like, man, hey, did you hear what? So, do what? Yeah, it might do that. But then again, it could be something true. Like to what Lyndall's point, it could just involve somebody's personal affairs. Right? It might be a truth about their personal affairs, but it might not be something that you have consent to share or need to be sharing.
We play a game that sort of is along that line, whereby, you whisper something to somebody, and we've done this like in a fellowship gathering,
Sure.
and all that, just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
The point is made there, but okay, so something is said, a short little story, says to, and then that person has to turn around and repeat that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become a show on TV too.
Yeah, sure.
So by the time it gets all the way around, it's totally
Different than how it started, yeah. I think we called it telephone when I was a kid and we played it, right? And you would pass it. They called it telephone, yeah. But yeah, here's another thing with gossip is I think a lot of times it involves unverified information, right? Not necessarily false or true information, but it's, I heard this about so-and-so. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but this is what I heard, right? And that's how it ends up getting told, right? And so it's like, well, especially if it's a negative connotation, probably best not to say it, especially if you don't know if it's true. And even if you knew it's true, if it's negative, you might not need to say it. Did you have something? Mm. Sure, yeah.
Well, they do that to people that are already dead that can't defend themselves through a lie.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it can be done that way too. So, yeah. So gossip is interesting. It's similar to slander, but it's more subtle. And I think if a Christian if you hear another Christian slander somebody, like your red flag goes up, and you're like, okay, maybe we don't talk about somebody like that. But when gossip happens, we don't always have the same red flag go up, right? We tend to let that one slide a little bit more. Yeah. Yeah. What good's going to come of saying it? What positive is it positive? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Doesn't meet the Ephesians 4 criteria, does it? All right. The next one is backbiting. What do we think about that? You can get an idea on what that is. I know a lot of these are kind of related and overlap, but it could be lies, but I don't think it has to be. I think I differentiate in my mind backbiting as it's intentionally malicious, right? You are speaking in a malicious or unpleasant fashion about someone else, particularly someone who's not there. But yeah, it's very, very similar. Yeah, very. Like I said, a lot of these are connected and overlap, but they have some nuance to them. So, yeah. All right. One other one is, I think this is the last one. Yeah, the last one in the list is whisperings, and this, similar maybe to rumor or to gossip, spreading rumors, murmuring. All that can be connected, but sometimes it's just whisperings can just be spreading the secrets of another person, right? Like for instance, secrets. Not every secret is bad, right? A secret can be okay. It can be an acceptable thing in a certain context, right? If Ed comes to me and says, hey, Zach, I've been, I need to talk to you in confidence. I've been struggling with this, right? Well, he doesn't have to tell everybody about that he's going through, but he may come to a trusted brother and tell him about it. Can you, walk with me through this? Can you pray with me about this? But then I go around and I tell somebody else. That's kind of whispering, right? It was supposed to be confidential, it's supposed to be kept in a certain closed circle, and now I've exited that. I've whispered it to somebody else. That's kind of one way that I would define it there. Any other thoughts on that? Yes. Yeah. You don't have the right to share that, right? Yeah, for sure.
I can remember going to school back out in Arizona, that we would get in a group, and maybe two of the people in the group were Spanish, and they would start talking Spanish.
Yeah.
We didn't understand what they were saying, and that was like whispering.
Yeah.
But we didn't understand what they were saying. We didn't know if they were talking good about us or bad
Bad.
about it. So we got told we would pull ourselves away because.
Sure.
But they were just, that was natural for them to speak in their, most of them spoke English because they started school.
Sure. Yeah. When I've traveled abroad, when I was in Italy, that happened. We took. And so we were very obviously American, okay? Like everybody, the Italians all knew we were American by how we dressed, how we talked, how we acted. And so they would talk about us, and our assistant director that was on the trip, he was, in his younger 30s, so he didn't look that different to some of us. And so they may not catch that he wasn't a student, but he grew up in Italy, spoke fluent Italian, and he would catch them sometimes and kind of call them out on what they might be saying. So that does happen in those different cultures. So. But anyway, yeah, so there you have these lists. All of these fall into the category of speaking evil against a brother. It can be any form of these, and there might be more. One place in Scripture that you find a lot of these grouped together is 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 20. So let's go and read that verse very quickly. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 20. Yeah. So some of those words that we've talked about you find in this list, but Paul's basic idea here to the Corinthian church is, hey, I'm going to come to Corinth, and when I get there, I may not find you as I wish, because I may find you talking about each other in these types of ways, which is how you ought not to speak. And you may not find me how you wish to find me, because what they would hope is that it's going to be a good reception when Paul comes, but Paul comes and finds that, he's not going to be too happy about the situation. So they may not find him as they hope to find him either. So that was a problem even early on in the church. People using their language how they should in regards to one another. The church has never been perfect, right? We are made righteous by the blood of Christ, all of us, but the church has always had its imperfections and its disagreements and contentions within itself that it has to work through. All right, you got a special warning in the book there. I think it's on the side of the next page. Maybe it's page 36, I think, in the book. On the side it says a special warning. And it's from 1 Timothy chapter 5. So let's go and take a look at that passage. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 19 through 21. If somebody would take that one. All right, thank you. So here we were talking about speaking evil against an elder in particular, right? One is admitting a charge against an elder. Now, if you admit a charge against an elder and it's true, I don't know that's necessarily speaking evil, but if it's not true, right, then it falls into that category of slander, something like that maybe. Why do you think this warning is given? Why do you think a special warning is given of, okay, don't just be careful how you speak about one another, but be especially careful about admitting a charge against an elder? Yeah, they got to meet a list of qualifications, right? Blameless, maybe the overarching thing. They're supposed to be men who are blameless, men who are above reproach. The idea of above reproach is kind of the idea of, if somebody were to admit a charge against them, you would have a hard time believing it because of the character of that person. Right? It doesn't mean they're impossible. It's like they could make a mistake and sin. Obviously, they do sin, but you would, like, if they brought a charge against us, we would say that doesn't sound like them. That doesn't sound like the kind of person that they are. So you got to be careful when admitting that charge. Also, think about the effect on the congregation, right? If you admit a charge against an elder, and if it's true or not true, it can have a damaging effect. But if it's not true, and you don't proceed with caution, and you admit a charge against an elder, you slander them, or you whisper, or you murmur against them, and you can have an effect on the whole congregation because of that. I mean, how many churches have split because something like this has happened concerning a particular elder or something like that? Mickey. Yes, yep. And that's the cautionary tale. And that's true for even outside of the eldership. The Bible talks about that. But not in, here it's like, okay, let's, on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, we can start to consider it, right?
It's interesting that comes right after what Paul says in verse 17, the elders who rule well are considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching.
Yeah.
And then it talks about the laborers worthy of his wages.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
On the heels of that, here's a
Yeah. So it's kind of like, okay, he gave some elders who rule well. What do you do? Well, they're worthy of double honor. Then what if an elder doesn't rule well? What if he doesn't live up to that? Okay, well, if you're going to admit a charge against an elder, you better be careful about how you do it. Right? That's kind of how I read it. There. One thing I was thinking about too is like, okay, elders, they are shepherds of the congregation. They are in charge of shepherding, so they have to give an account of the souls that are under their care. And so we proceed with caution because it's kind of like along the lines of, I would caution somebody to be very careful about speaking poorly about the parents who raised them and did so much for them in their life. Right? Looked out for them, fed them, made sure they had everything that they needed. Right? They weren't perfect. No parent's perfect, right? But they tried very hard. I would caution you to be very cautious about speaking poorly against them, because you honor and respect them for what they did to take care of you and watch over you. I kind of see it similarly with elders, right? Eldership is not an easy job. It's a heavy burden to bear. And so, if you're going to bring a charge against them, you need to proceed with caution, because these are people, they're supposed to be people who go through a lot to watch over and care about you and your soul. So just some thoughts there. Other thing before we move on is, did you notice how closely this matches up with the language Jesus teaches in Matthew 18 about how if you have a problem against a brother, like what are you supposed to do about it? But what does Jesus say there in Matthew 18? What steps does he lay out? Okay, you got your brother sins against you. What do? Go to him alone, right? That's step number 1. What's number 2? If he doesn't listen, taking 1 or 2 more with you. So, right, evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, as it says here. Okay, and then what happens if that doesn't do anything? Take it to the church, and then lastly, if he still doesn't listen, let him be to you as a Gentile or a tax collector, right? And so that's basically the way he lays out. He doesn't go through all that, but the general idea here, even with an elder, the kind of idea is, okay, proceed with caution. Make sure you do what the Lord would have you to do, especially if it's with an elder, right? So don't admit a charge against an elder except on the evidence of 2 or 3. So I would say, okay, if you think there's a charge to be admitted, step 1 would be, let me go to the elder, right? Hey, is this going on? That's step 1. Step 2, okay, if we're going to admit the charge to somebody, it needs to be on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Right? And then step 3, if they persist in sin, in other words, they haven't listened to this point, then rebuke them in the presence of all. In other words, you take it to the church. Yes?
When you brought up Hebrews chapter 13 about the way your leaders
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
watch over the souls, let's see the story not to grieve, or be unprofitable. And then in the next verse it says, pray for us, for we're sure that we have a good conscience. Because I read the thing about ourselves, I don't really know a thing. So I say right there together, as leaders, we request your prayers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes we're human, and we can stumble.
Mm-hmm.
We may be struggling with something that you may not know about.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I would say too, with maybe a reason that he included this, the author might have included this in the lesson on not speaking evil against one another, is when someone is in a position of leadership, they are naturally become a more likely target to be spoken evil against, right? To complain about something they said or did, or decision that they made, or what they said from the pulpit, or they shouldn't have said it this way when they were visiting me in the hospital. They didn't have the right bedside manner, or something along those lines. It's very, very easy to become a target when you're in a position like an elder. So I think maybe that's one reason, besides the fact it's talked about here in Scripture, of course, that the author's like, okay, let's include it in not speaking evil against one another. How are people who are outside the church ever going to respect the church if the church doesn't respect itself, especially the leadership of the congregation, right? Just a thought there. All right, let's look at Ephesians chapter 5, verse 4, and answer this question. There are 3 types of speech that are condemned in Ephesians 5, 4. What are they? Let's read the verse first, of course. Somebody take Ephesians chapter 5, verse 4. Okay, so what are the 3 types of speech that are condemned? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Filthiness, foolish talking, coarse jesting, or crude joking, depending on your translation there. Well, what does it mean to speak, to talk in a filthy manner, or speak in a way that we would label filthiness? Yeah, I think profanity falls in there. Yeah, there's some topics that are just not suitable for conversation, right? Yeah. Yeah. So that's how I would label that. Foolish talk, silly talk in some translations. Like there's some things are just not there's no benefit to the discussion. Like, it's just empty discussion. It doesn't go anywhere. It'd be better if it was just left unsaid. And then of course, crude joking. That can be the dirty jokes that that we refer to, coarse jesting. I think that one is an easy one to fall prey into in our society, maybe every society. I don't want to just label us, but in our society, like I think a lot of the comedy that you see on television, that you see in like stand-up comedy, falls into this category of coarse jesting or crude joking. It's making jokes that on the surface are humorous, but the topics that are being discussed are actually things that are sinful. And so we need to be careful about participating in that. And so it's kind of like, well, we don't need to speak about each other in this way, but we don't need to speak to each other in this way either. What about being double-tongued? 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8. What does it mean to be double-tongued? Somebody can read that for us as well if you want to. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I was hoping somebody would say that. That's kind of what I think of is, in one circle of people or to one person, you say one thing, but over here you say something else, right? Or like you go up to somebody and you talk to somebody and you speak one way to them and you act one way toward them, but then you turn right around and you talk bad about that person to somebody else, right? Yeah, it's like, okay, now I've presented myself in two different ways. Now that is also double-tongued. Or insincere, speaking in an insincere manner, I think also falls into that category as well. Yep. That's in the qualifications, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think in some translations, instead it says just don't be given to wine for both. I have to go back and check that. But I think that depends on translation on that. Yeah. Yeah. Easy to not be given to much wine if you're not given to any wine. But, all right, let's look at, I've got just a couple minutes left. I'm trying to decide what I actually want to look at. Let's look at Galatians 5, 19 through 21. And then I've got one more passage I want to visit before we end. I'll have to skip a little bit here. Galatians 5, 19 through 21. This, of course, is the works of the flesh, right before we have the fruit of the Spirit right after that. But let somebody read through that list of that's given in those three verses. Yeah. So the question that's in the book is, which of the works of the flesh could involve speech? Right. Well, I think you could probably make an argument for everyone because, even in stuff like other stuff you may lie to cover it up. So it may involve speech. But if you even think in a more direct fashion, you start thinking about things like hatred or enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy. All of those involve speech, right? Most of the time, speech is at the very center of that. I've never thought about it that way, that it's such a large part of the works of the flesh that are listed there. You can throw into the category of, okay, let's make sure that you speak to each other and about each other in the correct way. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Process. We understand that.
Mm-hmm.
In God's word. But one of those things could be language that this brother or sister, as I've heard it, that occasionally a word comes out that
Sure.
we're like, oh, okay, and it's a slip.
Mm-hmm.
Slip is different than practicing something.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, definitely, for sure. Yep. There's a difference between someone who's actively working to try and better themselves in that area than just ignoring it and living in that way willingly, for sure. One other thing I wanted to talk about, this is the last thing I wanted, but all this about speaking evil against one another, I thought about James chapter 8. We could go to a number of passages, for instance, the golden rule, do unto others as you have them do unto you. I mean, speak about others as you have them speak about you, right? But what about James chapter 2, verse 8? Somebody read this, and then we'll be done for tonight. Okay, so maybe kind of a litmus test you run things through. Is it okay to talk about the person this way, to say this and not say it? By speaking about someone in this way, am I fulfilling the royal law? Right? And the royal law, according to James 2, verse 8, is love your neighbor as yourself. And that's really what it comes down to, is that we speak to one another in a loving way. We speak about one another in a loving way, rather than speaking evil against one another. And I would just say, as a last word of caution, that as we go throughout our lives, we interact with people who are lost, people who are not members of the Lord's church, that we need to be very careful about how we speak about the church and about our brethren in the church, because it says something about the church, it says something about the Lord, how we carry ourselves. If we are complaining against everybody else in the congregation, probably not going to be very attractive in terms of those who are not in the church at all. So, all right, I'm out of time. I've got the Devo also, but I guess I'll wait a little bit before I start, because I don't have anybody.